Thank you very much, everybody. I'd just like to draw your conversations to an end now. Thank you very much. I'd just like to welcome you all here. A little while ago I had this idea that I thought, you know, people from Bradfield and probably everywhere would like to see in the flesh the candidates and hear directly from them. And clearly tonight, you know, by the numbers that we've got here, that you agree with that too. So we just thank you for coming. I'd also like to thank the Club Turramurra, by the way. It's rebranded, so a bit of advertising for them. Club Turramurra, I want to thank them for being so free with this venue and being quick to say yes to that. And James Sneddon, the manager over there. James, you've been great to deal with, nice and easy, and thank you very much for I'd also like to thank, I better go the right order, James Barton, the boss man from Barton Management, and Harrison. Harrison's done all the work, James has just come along for a cruise. But they provided the mic system, and so we thank you very much for doing that too, guys. But of course, tonight is about deciding on who we have representing us in Parliament. And that's important for you guys, and it's important for these guys here. And I want to introduce you to them. Closest to me is Martin Cousins in green. And then Janine Kitson. And she's an independent, Bradfield can do better. And lastly is Rob Fletcher from the United Australia Party. And I want to thank you three people for your courage and your commitment to have a go. It takes a lot to do what they're doing, and you know, part of Australian culture is to have people to have a go. So we've got people here that will have various views, and you know, you've got an opportunity to hear what they've got to say, and later on you have an opportunity to ask questions. But I'd also like to give you some apologies. Firstly, from Nick Buller. She's an independent, and she had a function already booked before I even thought of this idea. So she's unavailable and sends her apologies. David Brigden from Labor, 2 days ago, rang and apologised. He's got a family issue and is not able to attend tonight. And Paul Fletcher from Liberal is flying back late tonight from Melbourne, so he sends his apologies. We also have a David Lowe from One Nation. He arrived as a candidate just right at the close of time for people to nominate forward or put their names forward. We've been unable to locate him or talk to him, so we couldn't invite him. And then for those people who have seen the flyer, there was another person, Tom Sellers, and he pulled out of the election after we went to print, so hence why he's not here as well. Now I'd like to introduce you to Chris Russell. It's my pleasure to do so. He's our moderator for this evening, and I'd like to just give you a brief summary of some of his experience. He's the current chair of the Ag Institute Australia, and that's the Ethics Committee and the Disciplinary Tribunal. He's a former national president, Australia Institute of Agricultural Science and Technology. He's a former deputy chair of the Council of Barker College. He's a professional moderator, MC, including National Farmers Federation and numerous agricultural industry conferences. And he's been the past president and is a life patron of NTAG. For those that may not know NTAG stands for North Turramurra Action Group. He's also received a Ku-ring-gai Council Community Services Award. I can give him a bit of a hard time about this. It's Chris Russell AM, so he's a morning bloke.
You sound like a
But really, I mean, it is an honour to say that Chris was appointed the member of the Order of Australia AM 2018 for significant service of Australia science and technology. So good luck to Chris.
So, he sounds like my mother, I'm sorry. But look, I would add my welcome to all of you tonight. I think this is going to be a really interesting night. Obviously, I was disappointed that neither the Labor Party nor the Liberal Party would be here. But when I thought about it, there's two things in the fair dinkum department I think about this election. One is that if the Liberal Party don't win Bradfield, I'll walk from here to Wollongong in thongs. So that's kind of what's going to happen. But the other joint factor, the other joint factor is that the most likely thing the bookies will say is that this parliament is probably going to be a hung parliament. Every chance of it being a hung parliament. So all of a sudden, the independents, in a sense, become as relevant, if not more relevant, than the two major parties who we're probably all fairly familiar with their big policies, and we know that one of them is most likely going to be the government. So that's what makes tonight, I think, pretty special for us, because we get to hear, without the other parties being present, exactly what they think their parties will bring to that, and what hammers they'll be holding over the heads of the whichever party ends up with forming a minority government, on the assumption that they don't get in their own right. So I think that's the basis of with it. We should look about that tonight. As far as the way the speeches are going to work, each of the candidates has drawn lots about who speaks in what order. So the order you see them is the order you will hear from them. They're first of all going to give a 2-minute introduction on themselves in order. Then they're going to give a 3-minute kind of platform type dissertation on what their platform is as is relevant to us here. And I guess we're all Australians, so we want to hear what they're going to do overall. And then there is a series of questions which have been put forward and given them that were provided in advance. And they're going to be talking to each of those questions after that. Following that lot, which I think will take about an hour all up, will then be open for general questions. Now, when we get to the general questions, I'll come back to this then, but, I'd ask you to stand up. I'd ask you to follow 2 strict rules. One is be brief. We don't want any campaign speeches from the floor, just a 15-second question. Secondly, will you announce your name and what suburb you live in, so that we know that, where you're from and therefore gauge what your interest is. And the third thing is, one thing that I as moderator won't allow at all is any kind of discourtesy. I want to keep the evening courteous, by all means creatively abrasive. I think that's healthy, but I don't want any discourtesy. I don't want anything like that. So I'm sure none of you would contemplate that anyway. I mean, look at you, how good you are. So without any further discussion, I would ask our first speaker, Martin Cousins, to come up and give us a presentation about himself.
All right, good evening everyone. Thank you again for coming along. I'm pleased to be here. I'm your Greens candidate for Bradfield, so I'm pleased to be able to tell you a little bit about myself and about Greens policies as well. So I've only got 2 minutes for this, so I'll go through very quickly. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on tonight. I believe that's the land of the Darug people or the Turramurra people. I wish to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. So very quickly about myself, the boring bits perhaps to start with. I grew up, went to school in regional New South Wales, started work in regional New South Wales. I spent a few years in Melbourne, I spent a little bit of time overseas. I've now been in Bradfield for the past 14 years. And in that time, particularly recently, I've been quite active in a couple of environmental programs run by Green Guide Council. I do some work for a sporting organisation, Community Sport, to do electronic timing for them. I'm chair of an energy industry association. Is that 1 minute? Okay. And I'm also involved in other associations. Very quickly, my family. My mother was an immigrant. She was a nurse. My father worked in small business in retail. And I'm proud I've still got connections to retail myself. My education, I'm a chemical engineer. And I've also done a Master of Environmental Studies, so I call myself an engineer and also an environmentalist. And my career spans over 30 years in manufacturing, water and wastewater, and then I got into energy, specifically energy efficiency, something called demand management. And so I've worked in private, semi-government, consulting, own business. So I guess what I'm saying to you is I've got quite a broad experience across a number of facets. And I'd just like to finish with my values, what I believe in. So I want to make a difference environmentally, socially, financially for my clients.
Great, thank you very much. Ms. Kitson, would you like to tell us about yourself?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Janine Kitson. I'm an independent, a true independent, and I want to make a difference in the parliament that comes up. I've got a background in this community as a former Ku-ring-gai councillor, and I have worked for over 20 years respecting this land's heritage, its culture and its community. And at this point, I too pay my respects to the Turramurra and the Darug people on whose land we celebrate, so close to the Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park, which has the most superb artwork in this city of Sydney. I've been a teacher, I've been an educator, and I've given my service to children, and that's why I'm standing now, because I know children are the most important thing that we need to protect with the climate emergency. Thank you. There's lots of me to talk about, but I'm going to finish there because I'll be talking soon in a minute.
And finally, Rob Fletcher.
Hi, thank you. My name is Rob Fletcher. I grew up in the Blue Mountains, moved to country town near Orange, finished my schooling in the country town of Molong, so I'm a country boy. I worked and lived in Bathurst for 25 years as an industrial chemist and in the food industry. And during that time, I was a member of the Liberal Party for 15 years and a branch president for about 6 or 7 years in the electorate of Calais. I moved to, during that time, my family also owned a long daycare centre. We owned a mortgage broking business. Then I decided to try my hand at Sydney when my daughter finished school. I've only got one daughter, so I'm a father and I'm a grandfather, 2 lovely grandsons, and I represent every family in this community. We are just like you. I was left behind by the Liberal Party. That's why I'm running for the UAP. When I came to Sydney, my career extended into finance. I worked in the financial planning industry. I also had about 5 or 6 years as a consultant. I worked in the gold bullion industry, investing in gold, shares, futures, options, all sorts of things that people might read about in the Financial Review. So I've got an economics background as well as a chemistry background. I retired last year and I was watching Australia change drastically, and I thought it's time to stand up and open my mouth. So this is why I'm here.
Very good. So, Martin, could I ask you come and give us 3 minutes on the platform of your Green Party as it affects us?
All right. So what I think I'll do is, as a party that's been established for many years, represented in all levels of government, we've got lots of policies across the spectrum, as we've needed to do over time. So what I want to focus on is the 4 key priorities as outlined by our leader Adam Band in his recent press club address, and add a couple of my takes on some of those. So number 1 for him was action on climate, and number 1 within that is no new coal and gas. Basically the thinking is we're in a climate emergency now, we can't be putting more fuel on the fire. And so we're hoping that a step that everyone can agree to is to not create new mines and gas fields now that will last for 20, 30, 40 years. Now, there's benefits to it as well, and I very much believe in the benefits of acting on climate to Australia. We've got another question coming up on that, so I'll keep going for now. The second thing that Adam talked about was getting dental and mental health into Medicare. Now, we probably know, people amongst us, friends, how debilitating mental health or dental problems can be, and that they only get worse if you don't get them treated, and if you can't afford to get them treated, if you've got other priorities where you can't be spending money on those. So we want to get those two into Medicare so they're available to everyone. And I'll add, in the last Parliament where we were power sharing with Labor, we got children's dental health into Medicare. So we want to go to the next step. They're doing two policies which I think of particularly for young people, but not just young people, and they are addressing housing inaffordability and wiping student debt. Okay, so obviously, as I say, definitely affect young people, but anyone at any stage of life. Something can happen. You can fall out of housing, fall into, whether it's divorce or illness, you have problems with housing. You might choose to go back and study. We think those two are both important. In terms of free education, really the thinking is it's one of the ways that somebody can improve their lot, get out of a situation and improve their standing. Do that for free, get a good education, and then hopefully when you've got a good job, you can pay a rate of tax, a higher rate of tax to repay that, a progressive rate of tax. I'm also personally emphasising the need to improve work security. The insecurity work is increasing, and I'm also emphasising action in aged care. So, if the government says it's going to roll out vaccinations, COVID vaccinations, then it should. If it's going to roll out RATs, then it should. And it should pay the workers in that sector appropriately, because it's a difficult job and we don't want to lose people from that sector. Thank you.
Thanks, mate. Jen, would you like to talk to us about where your campaign is coming from?
I want to tackle the major issues of our time: climate change, integrity, and safeguarding our ABC. We are running out of time with the climate emergency. We all need to rapidly decarbonise, and I've got a plan. My motto is Bradfield can do better. We need to decarbonise the electorate of Bradfield with renewables, batteries, and solar power, and we can do it. Integrity is my second major issue. We have to end the political corruption, the rorting, the pork barrelling. We need a higher standard, and we need a member who's going to meet that standard. The electorate of Bradfield has been taken for granted for too long, and we need a true and trusted independent who will represent the community and not the political party. I will insist on a strong federal integrity commission where politicians will be held accountable. My third issue is the ABC. It's indispensable for a strong democracy. It informs, it entertains us, it's vital in times of bushfire and floods, because often that is the only service that people rely on to get out alive. The ABC is not just for Bradfield, it's for the nation. It goes to rural areas. It's trusted. It does the heavy lifting, and it exposes corruption on both sides of politics. And as well as fighting for a safe climate, to end corruption and safeguard our ABC, I want quality investment in education, the arts, and aged care. And of course, I will always be insisting on equality and justice for all.
Right, and our third candidate, Rob Fletcher.
Hi. So when I signed up to join with the United Australia Party, there was only 3 policies that we had, and our policies that ran deep to what was going on over the last 2 years with the coronavirus, to end the lockdowns, to abolish the vaccine passports, and to restore the doctor-patient relationships. All three policies that the government stood on for 2 years, which breached the Nuremberg Code, which breached the Privacy Act, which breached the Australian Constitution in several ways. And this is a fact. Unfortunately, I don't watch ABC. I don't watch any other television at all. I haven't watched television for 10 years. I get my news from journals. I read and I listen and I research. And so there are alternatives to funded ABC. So I was very blessed once joining the UAP that we decided to have other policies because we wanted to save Australia, not to save Australia from a pandemic, but to save Australia from economic crisis, which we have on our doorstep. We've now got $1 trillion worth of debt, which is a big number. A million seconds is 12 days. 1 trillion seconds is 32,000 years. Australia will never pay off $1 trillion worth of debt because of the policies of a Liberal and Labor government. So the UAP has a policy of a licence fee on iron ore, and within 15 to 20 years, that $1 trillion worth of debt will be paid off, and also fund other projects and policies that the United Australia Party will have once we're elected or gain the balance of power in Australia. We have a policy to protect your home mortgage with a 3% cap on mortgages going forward for 5 years whilst we get the Australian economy sorted. Because when an economy has $1 trillion worth of debt and inflation is rising, interest rates should be higher than inflation. We all know that. That's the way it works. But we've had manipulated markets, and we see that inflation now is rising, 5.1. It's probably more like 9, but various ways of calculating inflation. In the US, it's 8.7, and other countries, it's rising as well. So I don't think Australia would last very long with high interest rates, because equity in our home is the last bastion. We've lost jobs to overseas markets, we've lost industries, we've lost so much in this country, added so much debt, and the last thing left is your home equity, and we will protect that home equity as long as I'm standing.
Now we begin to focus in on some of the specifics, and we're doing that through these questions which have been put together by the organisers. The first one that we're coming to relates to financial management within the government. So each of the speakers is going to give us their view just specifically about that on that one question, then we'll go to the next question. So for their first 3 minutes on that, could I invite Martin to talk to us about government financial management?
Okay, so in the question that was given to us, there's a couple of specifics. There's firstly about the question of debt and this massive debt that Rob mentioned. So I'd probably be misrepresenting the Greens if I said our first priority is financial management and having a small government. That's not necessarily the case. But I said to Rob just the other day when I saw him that I am concerned about the huge debt that Australia has now, because I see it as an intergenerational equity issue. In other words, it's the same as climate change. If we're leaving a massive debt to our kids and grandkids, that's just not right. We need to address that now ourselves. So specifically, to reduce spending, what would the Greens do? We've been very critical of money that's been poorly directed under different programs, specifically the JobKeeper money for COVID. $25 billion or more went to companies that didn't need it, that increased profits. There weren't sufficient checks and balances in that program. There weren't hold points where the government could say, no, you don't need this anymore. There was no mechanism to claw back that debt. So really that was a poorly designed program, I'd say. We don't believe in subsidies to fossil fuel producers. That includes gas producers, petroleum refineries that are propping them up, and I can talk more about that, or building gas-fired power stations. All up, there are billions of dollars in this, recent time in this election that are going to that. We believe in strong public accountability. We want to crack down on pork barrelling. We don't believe in handing out money to electorates to try and get them over the line, to marginal electorates. Even our best seats, or our seats where we're most likely to win, we're not going to be offering swimming pools or bypasses all things like that. We're offering things that we think are worthwhile and useful to all Australians. We don't believe in money that's wasted on offshore detention. There are billions of dollars that have gone into that. Thankfully now just a few hundred people remaining, but it's still spending lots of money. And part of that, we annoy our Pacific neighbours. When we say it's not our problem, it's your problem, we're going to solve it offshore. We've got less like to have these large infrastructure projects. Many of that Labor and Liberal are proposing. Many of them have no business case. Things like dams, they sound nice, but there's no environmental case. I'd be worried about downstream effects on the Murray-Darling, for example. Of course, the other way to reduce debt is to increase revenue. And if we think about the increasing likelihood of climate-related disasters, the potential for future pandemics, and the support that people feel they need and justifiably need in those, we think that there is a role for government to be talking about taxing. So we've opposed the stage 3 tax cuts. We've proposed a tax on billionaires. We've proposed to tax the multinationals and also introduce a petroleum tax.
Talks about government financial management and taxation and all those things.
We need to rapidly transform and transition and decarbonise our economy. That is the prime issue facing our economy. We need to restructure the economy so that it is fairer for everyone, not just billionaires and multinationals. We need to invest in clean, green infrastructure that does not destroy our Great Barrier Reef, our Great Artesian Basin, our Murray-Darling Basin, our forests, and even our Blue Gum High Forest here in Bradfield. We need to build resilience in our Australian economy. The global economy has failed us, where jobs have been shipped off, or we rely on cheap labour from overseas, which has been an utter failure. The pandemic has shined a light on the inherent weaknesses of our economy, and we need to address them. Unemployment. They say it's 4%, but all you need to do to be considered as employed is to work 1 hour a week. That is not acceptable. There are too many young people on casualised work who will never get a permanent job, which means they cannot get a loan and their lives are limited. There are cost of living pressures because people do not have the wages to pay for what they need. Unemployment. There are thousands of teachers who have lost their jobs in this economy, TAFE teachers, university lecturers, and as I am very concerned about, over 1,500 jobs from the ABC since 2014. Healthcare workers, artists in the pandemic who were so impacted, the hospitality. The economy the women bore the brunt of the economy. So we need to restore our public sector workers so that those predominantly women who look after our most vulnerable are really paid and given the economic tools they need. Does that mean I've finished? I've finished there, but I'll continue later. Thank you.
So Rob, if you'd like to talk to us about about the United Australia Party? Maybe your first point is that Clive could give us his advertising budget to put into it.
It's sizable, but the Liberals are spending more. And they spent $145 million of taxpayer money last year. We had the Liberal Party enforce a depression on the public and then save us from that depression over the last 2 years. That's exactly what happened. So don't think that they saved us from a pandemic. They actually forced this spending spree upon the country. Can anyone name any nation-building projects that they've spent $1 trillion on over the last eight years? There's nothing really to show for it.
5.5 billion on those submarines.
That's right. We're paying $5 billion for a submarine we won't get from France. We've ordered a submarine that will take 50 years to get here. We should have bought a second-hand one whilst that was in place. And they're not looking after families. Everyone's income side of their balance sheet has been damaged in some way over the last 2 years. Whether you're an artist or a nurse, or you're a part-time worker, or you're caught up as a barista in the hospitality industry. The hospitality industry was completely smashed during COVID without any respect. And a lot of these businesses are now being forced into bankruptcy because the ATO is demanding back taxes without any payment plan. And so they're throwing them to the wolves, and these people have to sell their homes, and they'll default on their leases, and the employees will have to go look for another job. So the UAP has a policy that the government will never be the source of a bankruptcy. We'll negotiate and help businesses in some way move forward so that we can help everyone be paid and grow the economy. And we want to spend $40 billion on health. Imagine if hospitals were started to build 2 years ago. They can't have lockdowns if there's hospitals being built left, right, and centre. They want lockdowns because of that. What did they say? To stop the impact on their hospital. Well, why don't we just build more hospitals? Why don't we have that? So our policy is $40 billion on health and $20 billion in education, directly to those areas, not through the state, so that they don't peel off any money. We want to increase the pension, $180 per fortnight. And we also want to reduce tax on the second job. So if you're entrepreneurial, you want to get out there and have a go to pay off the rising interest rates on your mortgages, you'll get half tax on that. Home loans, tax deductible. And if you want to move into a regional area, they'll have a 20% concession. So companies can move out to Bathurst, Orange, not Lithgow because it's too close, but other areas that are over 200 kilometres from the city and get a 20% concession on their tax. So then the pressure on the cities like Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane will be lowered, and we won't see the congestion. So Australia will be more spread, more like the US. So these are policies, and we need every single portfolio to make an account for what they've done, for what they've done over the last few years, because they've wasted so much money.
Okay, now I know you're all going to have a lot of questions, but can I ask you to take a note of them, keep them in your mind. We'll do questions on all of these subjects at the end. So now we're going to move on to climate policy, and a subject as an agricultural scientist very dear to my heart, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you've all got to say. So Martin, could I come and ask you to talk about climate change and climate policy?
Well, I'm interested to hear what you've got to say. So I guess, so climate and energy is the question. And we've talked a lot about it already, but probably for a number of you, many of you, it's a bit of a nebulous sort of concept. So just very quickly, want to say, well, what is, like, we, the Greens, firmly believe in the risk that posed by climate change. What would it mean for Bradfield? So Bradfield is an electorate that's surrounded by bushland in a lot of it. So there's an obvious risk there. If we have higher and higher temperatures, extreme weather, extreme fire days, there's an obvious risk to property there. We've just had significant rainfall events. We've had damage around the electorate, from that. Some of it will take a long, long time to repair. Not as bad, fortunately, as some of the other areas down on the coast in Manly, up in the Blue Mountains, where I was up on last week, and probably half the walks up there in the popular areas are closed due to damage from the flooding. But the positive sides of that for Bradfield, you know, we're not a regional electorate. We're never going to have a massive solar farm or a wind turbine or anything like that built in our electorate. What does it mean? For us, it'll really just mean more solar panels on our houses. It'll mean we get to drive EVs, which are great. It'll mean we should electrify our homes, so we'll get rid of our gas cooking, which has got benefits as well. We'll have jobs in that electrification. A lot of the people in Bradfield work in professional services, whether it's finance or legal services. There'll be lots of work for those people in this transition and the new energies of the future. So in terms of Greens policy, as I said, it's obviously something that we really focus on a lot. We've got a lot of policies in this area. We understand the science, we accept the science, we see the urgent need to act. Importantly, the world is moving and there's lots of opportunities for Australia as a whole. I've just about used up all of my time. Policies, I mentioned the moratorium on coal and gas. We want to get to net zero by 2030, 75% reduction by 2030, net zero by 2035. Big build of renewable energy, we've said 700%, that means replace all our coal and gas with renewables, build more to allow us to have EVs, and build more to produce the green products that we can export around the world, you know, whether that's manufactured goods or even the energy directly. And to anticipate the question, we say no to nuclear for all the old reasons: too slow, too expensive. I can give you examples if you like, risk of waste and so on. There was in the question there was one specifically about EVs. You know, are they low carbon at all? Well, if you've got rooftop solar on your house and you've got an EV and you charge it during the day, it's carbon free, and so on. I'll go on and go on. Yeah.
Thank you, Martin. Janine, what is your position as far as climate change in Bradfield?
We have to do something quick.
There you go, way you go.
Okay, we need to set meaningful climate goals, and that means faster, stronger carbon reductions. We need to electrify everything in this electorate of Bradfield. We have to rewire it, we have to fix the grid, we have to build renewables here, because if we can do it here, and we should be able to do it here, we are the most affluent, the most entrepreneurial and the most educated electorate in the nation, and we should be leading it and showing the nation how to do it. We need more renewable rooftop solar. We need to install the batteries. We need the electrical vehicle chargers. We need it here in the Bradfield electorate. My renewable plan is called renewbradfield.energy. And I've set it up because when I put out my 50,000 flyers for my campaign, I wanted to be proactive and do something regardless of what the election result would be. To go to 50,000 people with a flyer and say, sign on to renewbradfield.energy is an example of my commitment already, because we are running out of time and we can do it very fast. In this electorate, we have professional people, we have engineers, we have scientists, we have the expertise here who can give the advice. We also have the people with finance advice of how to subsidize all these things that we need to renewably electrify this electorate. It's going to take 10 years, and that's what we've got to do, because all the scientists are saying we have to get to 2030, achieve it by then. But guess what? Our electricity costs are going to go down. We're going to create local jobs, because when we do this, the work is going to stay in this electorate, and that's terrific. We're in a great position to do that. Matt Keane, the New South Wales Treasurer, has been leading the way for New South Wales for climate action. and his Hornsby electorate is within this Bradfield electorate. We can build on what is happening on our 3 local government areas with this electorate. There's Ku-ring-gai, there's Hornsby, as I've said, and there's Willoughby. We've got to put solar panel on every school that's in this electorate. The only barrier we have to doing all that is one political party. And I have to say, a vote for them is a vote for Barnaby Joyce. Is that finished? I've finished. Oh, 1 minute. No, she's finished. So we can do it. Bradfield can do better. We can electrify this electorate.
You nearly got another minute there. Rob.
Thank you. I grew up on a farm, and I was taught that the climate changes 4 times every year because the Earth spins on an axis. You know, the definitions are changing all the time. You know, global warming, carbon, bad, climate change, bad. You know, what is it? You know, zero carbon makes as much sense as zero COVID. And zero COVID will send this country broke. Zero carbon will send this country broke. We've already got $1 trillion in debt. We've already got $1 trillion in debt. How many more trillion will it cost to have 15th century windmills and solar capturing panels on homes? You know, and you know, solar and wind don't have any backup for weather we've had over the last 4 months. You know, the coal industry has to be of a certain size to manage peak load in summer when all the air conditioners are going, when all the factories are running hard. You know, so what happens when there's 3 or 4 months of no sun and no wind? You know, so we really do need to have a diversified energy policy. We want to see nuclear power stations. We think we're old enough now to have an adult conversation about nuclear power. They're now making Generation 4 nuclear power stations. We can make nuclear power stations that don't lead to nuclear weapons. There's all sorts of technologies. Thorium is a technology that they cannot make nuclear weapons from.
You don't know what you're talking about.
And so that technology is out there. As far as EVs, they have batteries that weigh almost a ton. And to get the rare earths and the precious metals in those batteries, it takes 250 tonne of earth to be mined. And that 250 tonne of earth is washed with 5 million litres of water. And that water becomes polluted water. And so that's just for one battery in, say, a Tesla car. So that is something that's not calculated when we talk about this carbon-free energy coming from the sky. Germany's tried this net zero and they got to 60 and they're going backwards. They're reversing it because they're going broke. Industry can't afford the power prices and they just don't have the power when they need it. They have blackouts all over the place. So we can try it. Yeah, let's go for it. But be prepared to wait for hours and hours for your phone to charge up, or days or weeks. You know, so you won't be able to check your social media. I think that's about all for me.
All right, so that wraps that up. And look, I'd just ask you, by all means, be enthusiastic, but just if you could just pay respect to the speakers who are speaking. And so we're now going to move to healthcare. Another issue I'm sure is close to all of our hearts. So if I could ask Martin to come and talk about the Greens policy on future healthcare.
Okay, so the question that was put to us was more specifically about COVID, so I'm going to talk mostly about that management of COVID. I've already mentioned a couple of things in the introduction about getting dental and mental health into Medicare. And generally, you know, as a rule, the Greens are very protective of Medicare and the benefits it provides. So, as I said, COVID, we believe the intervention was necessary because of the COVID pandemic. Some of it was good, some of it could have been better. The original varieties of COVID were deadly, particularly for the elderly, the immunocompromised, others with underlying health conditions. Even yesterday, 19 people died in New South Wales from COVID. And the total,
with COVID.
yeah, with COVID. well, COVID is the cause of death, yeah? That's what's registered. So 2,700 so far, all right? So the restrictions that were put in place were sensible. The vaccinations, the mask wearing, the rats, the best way to control the spread of disease, and the public should be encouraged to take these up in the strongest possible measures. Let it rip would have quickly overwhelmed our health systems. And
How do you know?
Hang on, please.
well, health systems are already under pressure without the overload of patients, and we know ourselves that you get COVID as a healthcare worker, as any worker, you're offline. You can't go in and work. So there was a need for lockdowns at times to control it. Vaccine passports, I believe that as well. I would also say to you, businesses have a legal responsibility to their employees and also to their customers. And so to say, oh yes, you don't need a vaccination, you don't need to take precautions, it's just wrong. And I would compare, if you were saying, all right, do we need these laws or not? Have a look at road rules, okay? We might think we do the right thing, we would hope we might do the right thing, but obviously not everybody does. People still get caught drink driving, speeding, not wearing seatbelts. So really, the unfortunate thing perhaps is we needed these rules. We were happy that the government provided JobKeeper, particularly where it was needed for insecure work. We're happy as anyone that restrictions are now lifted, and that it's just people working in key industries that still have to have vaccination passports, wear masks and so on. I still recommend wearing a mask. I think it's a good idea. There could have been improvements. I've got a list. We could have had properly designed quarantine facilities. The government could have done that earlier. They could have anticipated a pandemic. We could have had medical equipment on standby already, masks. We've had previous pandemics. We could have gone onto that quickly, etc., etc. We could have done more.
Your turn, Janine. Let's hear about healthcare.
The COVID-19 pandemic, we all know, was not just an Australian health emergency, it was a global emergency. I've said before, it revealed the many pressures across the healthcare system, our aged care, our hospitals, mental health, maternity care, and disability health. The pandemic shined a light on the long-standing issues that have denied safe, appropriate, effective, and affordable health care for all Australians. I support a high quality, well-funded health and maternity care system with the capacity and the resources to meet increased demand and complex needs across all sectors, from preventative to hospital to end-of-life care. A well-funded and regulated aged care system that supports a strong, valued workforce to effectively deliver high-quality, dignified care to our aged residents. And this includes implementing fully the Aged Care Royal Commission's recommendations, and particularly funding and legislating the requirement for a 24-hour registered nurse presence in nursing homes, building a strong and valued post-pandemic healthcare workforce, I support investment in preparing for the future with policies, legislation and practices that genuinely and proactively address the health issues that are going to come with the climate crisis. We always need to depend on the advice of medical experts and our public health professionals. In our wealthy, well-resourced and highly developed country, every Australian should be able to expect and receive the very best health and aged care delivered in a timely fashion.
And on this topic, healthcare, Rob Fletcher.
Well, I'm no doctor or expert, but the pandemic was only called because the World Health Organization changed the definition of what a pandemic was. That is true. And if we went to the old definition, there's no way it would have been a pandemic. And we had no flu over the last 2 years. Oh, is that because we wore a mask? Or is that because the flu was captured in the COVID statistics? Barack Obama said this week that effectively the world has just gone through a clinical trial with billions of people. Were you told that? Were you asked? Or was it forced down your throat? If you volunteer for a clinical trial in a new drug, you'd sign some documents. You may even get compensation. You probably get paid, and you get told what the risks are. They say you have consent. That there are 2 components in the vaccine that are patented, so they can't tell you what's in those components. Now, you might find out in a few years' time. But an insurance company in the US, America One, said the death statistics they're seeing in the last quarter are the highest they've seen since the company started in 1896. It's 10 standard deviations from normal. Now, if anyone knows statistics, your heart's probably racing right now. That's like a 1 in 200 year catastrophe. It's virtually impossible. For the death rates for working age, 18 to 64, to increase by 40% to the pre-pandemic quarter. So what are these deaths? Maybe it's a clinical trial, because I worked in science, and if you're going to do a trial, you always have a control. You study those who don't take the medication, and you compare it to those who do take a medication, and that's science. So anything else is just quackery, and so they're not giving us the full data, and we need the full data. We want to see nurses get their jobs back. We want to see them re-employed. It was a breach of the Nuremberg Code to force medical treatments on people, and that was from World War II, because that's what's happening in World War II. Look, I could go on. There's so much about this subject I avoid because people don't want to hear it, because unfortunately most of us have been forced into a vaccine, and so there's a cognitive dissonance. We don't want to acknowledge the truth, we don't want to hear the truth, and we ostracize our friends who have done research. I was talking recently to someone who spent the whole career building vaccines, and she won't touch them with a barge pole. So
we didn't have them, we'd have been shot.
Well, we could have managed the whole thing a lot differently without wasting $500 billion, but I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Rob. Obviously, an area, and we'll look forward to the questions about that when we come to the end. So the next topic relates to this balance between, privacy and identity theft and welfare fraud, all those things, and how you handle that. So if we can address this issue with you first, Martin, would you like to talk to us about the Greens policy in that area?
All right. So again, there was a fairly specific question put to us around digital ID and online privacy, so I've prepared for that. And it was around the government, Australian government digital identity system. It wasn't something I was aware of, to be honest, but I found it's legislation that's been proposed. It's just drafted at this stage, put out October last year. The Greens haven't taken a policy on it to the election. There's no suggestion, as implied in the question, that it will be required, that you'll have to use it, or that it'll be used to restrict what you can view online or do online or anything like that. We believe that legislation must be reasonable. Data capture has to be reasonable, can only be used for the purposes which it's intended. It shouldn't be an invasion of privacy. Data must be held securely. There should be penalties if it's not. I'll point out, most of us, we all would have government ID already: driver's license, Medicare cards, tax file numbers, passports, etc., etc. And all of that has been going online. Various governments, with New South Wales government in some ways leading the way ahead of the federal government, and you can do a lot of stuff online using that ID that's there. And so people, I think, find that worthwhile. It's more convenient. It saves you having to go into a shop quicker, easier. So there's definitely some good points to it. And I guess also, if any of you have accessed or tried accessing any of the federal government services online, you've found they're pretty damn hard to deal with. And I think I found the only app with a 1 or 2 star rating in the MyGov ID. So any improvement to that would be welcome. So on the other side of that, I will say that the Greens have pushed back against reductions in freedom and privacy, online privacy, or intrusions into that, and the rise of surveillance and broad-scale data retention. So when that 2016-2018 period, how quickly time goes. A couple of our senators, Scott Ludlam was around at the time, and now John has taken it up, has campaigned against mandatory metadata retention, for example, and they want greater protection of online rights, digital rights. We're cautious about governments acting under the guise of national security and tightening controls, retaining more data than they need to, and also corporations capturing data, using that data for commercial purposes without permission. That's probably it.
Yes, I must say I'm not aware of the premise that's there either, but if it did exist, I guess we can talk about it. So go ahead, Janine.
And I just say we do really need to be incredibly careful about not stirring up fear about a proposed digital identity bill.
Why?
Because one of the biggest problems emerging in this campaign is a suite of conspiracy theories that are distracting us from the real issues we are facing in this election. It happened in the 2019 election, remember the death tax. That was complete misinformation. The United Australian Party has run this issue of misleading the Australian public with its $60 million last election. And it's doing it again this. That is corrupting our democracy. And that's why I say the ABC, our national broadcaster, is more important than ever. Because when we need to know the truth, we get it informed. The Bradfield electorate love their ABC. You may not love it, but there are many who do. And they want it to be strong, well-funded and independent. It is the most trusted news service. It is valued for its music, arts, health and four corners that shows a light on the misdeeds of government and gets us our royal commissions. And I want to tell you that the ABC Friends movement is a Turramurra movement. It began in 1976 and it has spawned a nationwide movement of people who will stand up here and defend the ABC. The ABC is really important for us in Bradfield. And I'll just give you one example of that. In 2014, with the cuts that came in, cuts that Tony Abbott promised, there would be no cuts to the ABC, and then proceeded to cut it. We lost the ABC's state line report that was run by Quentin Dempster. And I have to tell you, if we hadn't had that state line, we would not have been able to show programs like the rape of Ku-ring-gai, when we were absolutely distressed by the corruption of the New South Wales Labor Party with Eddie O'B. It was state line, it was the ABC, it was Quentin Dempster who really shone a light on that corruption. So that's why we need an independent ABC. The news at the moment is about the Solomon Islands. Well, I can tell you, I worked on an AusAid project in Samoa, and we had a strong ABC there. But what was cut in 2014 again was the ABC international services to the Asian Pacific. That's the problem. We need to restore our ABC.
When I was working for the ABC, I had the identity card. I think that was the link. Rob, go ahead.
The ABC has banned Craig Kelly from any interviews, and this is a democratic society in the middle of a free election, and so the only way for us to get our views through is to spend money on advertising. You know, I first woke up to what the government were up to with the Australia Card. Bob Hawke tried to foist that on the population back in the 80s, and the population said no during a referendum. You know, and it was pretty clunky technology back then. But now they've got technology that they want to foist on the public. If you go to the website digitalid.gov.au, you think it's a government website, but it's actually sponsored by private interests. But also the only benefit that's on that website, if you go right through it top to bottom, is it'll probably save you 20 minutes when you go and apply for something. Now that digital ID will then allow the government to, see the style of government has changed in the world. They are leading people by the nose to the next corner. You don't know what's around the next corner. And you're led by the nose to the next corner. You don't know what's around the next corner. And you're led to the nose to the next corner. So digital ID is leading people by the nose to digital currency. And digital currency is something that can be turned on and off. Your money is either on or off. You've either got it or you haven't. You can spend it anywhere. But with digital currency, they say, I don't like your views. I don't like your attitude. Look at the protests in Canada. They just took all their money. You know, so Google Pay and PayPal can do that because it's digital money. So that's the dystopian future. What they want with digital ID is to bring forward digital money. And so one of the last acts of Parliament was to vote. They rushed it through, and it was pretty unanimous. I think there's only 5 people that voted against it. Was to vote that the government can share our private data with private companies around the world. You know, the hoops that we've got to go through in business with private data is intense, and for the government to agree to do that, we know they're up to something. So we're just leading us to another corner. I've got another minute. Is that it? A look at free speech now. Elon Musk is bringing free speech back to online platforms. He wants people to be identified. He wants to get rid of all the fake profiles. He wants your face to be on the profile and your name to be on the profile. And you stand proud by what you say. Like a normal society, like we're having a conversation over dinner. And that's how privacy should be done. That's how normal societies work. We're not cattle, we're not sheep, and we're not to be inoculated every year by these governments who think we are.
All right, so that's that question, and again, save your questions and we can come to them at the end. So the last question now relates to integrity in government. And, you know, as chair of the Ethics Committee and the District Tribunal for Ag Consultants, this is also a subject which I think I'm very aware all professions run close to their heart, in both installing and then disciplining on that area. We want to hear now what these parties are going to do about bringing that same standard to government.
Okay, so look, we agree, I think, with the premise of this question. We think there's a massive problem with the credibility of governments and people's trust in government. at the moment. And, you know, for some of the reasons that the question suggests. So the scandals that are come to light and are just buried or, you know, allowed to quietly drift away. The PR brushing of things, you know, so something that's bad is good. You know, there's never we did anything wrong. It's all, you know, we'll tell you that it was good, we're doing the right thing, or it's somebody else's fault. We'll take the credit if something's good, but we'll pass it on to somebody else if not. The politicians acting for the short term and for the good of their party and their donors rather than the good of the people. Again, it's erodes public trust in the system and integrity. We would say also the state capture, so government ministers leaving government and then going and getting a job in consulting back to government or working in private industry the next day or the next week. The treatment of women in Parliament and the cover-up of various scandals that have occurred there. Plenty of it there. So the Greens have a plan for this that we're taking to the election. It includes a strong Federal Integrity Commission to shine a light on this corruption. Adam Bant said he introduced the first legislation in this several years ago now. Larissa Waters, I believe, another Greens senator, has also put forward some legislation. Obviously some of the independents have as well. Labor has said that that's a focus for them. So I guess in reality, if we were to get into the balance of Parliament, balance of power or have role in government, we'd be looking to whoever's in government to take a policy and then we could support that or critique it or whatever. Obviously what the current government has put forward was unsatisfactory. They couldn't find enough friends to support that and get that through. We want dirty money out of politics. We want limits on donations. The Greens already have limits on donations. We don't accept corporate donations. We have a limit of $6,000 per year per person in New South Wales. We want to increase the standards. The other thing I'll quickly mention is I'll call it our secret weapon, our lead Senate candidate, David Shoebridge. He's been in New South Wales Parliament for 10 years. He's been instrumental in cracking down in corruption in that Parliament. We're hoping that he can be elected to the Senate in the federal Parliament this election, and he wants to do the same thing there, to shine a light on corruption and those sorts of activities in our politics.
Okay, today, integrity and accountability in government. I'm sure it's going to be close to your heart as well.
The Bradfield electorate has a right to expect its Member of Parliament behaves honourably, ethically and with integrity. This is not happening. There's the $100 million sports rules, the $660 million railway station car park rules, the $30 million that this minister, this member of this electorate paid to Liberal donors when the land was only worth $3 million in Western Sydney. I could go on and document more and more and more of these incidents. But the question is the coalition engaged in massively political corrupt behaviour? If it is, let's get a strong corruption body with teeth to investigate. A federal ICAC must make ministers accountable and end the shonky deals, the pork barrelling and the rorting. For me, this is a really deeply personal issue because as a Ku-ring-gai councillor who opposed overdevelopment, I could never understand why the community's issues were constantly ignored. Is it because political donations from property developers are some of the biggest donors to political parties? In 2020, the federal government Parliament weakened political donation laws, making it easier for federal politicians to accept secret donations from property developers. As I said, I have a history of fighting inappropriate overdevelopment in this electorate, and I guess it just goes back 13 years ago, and Chris Russell was there in a meeting, a huge meeting in Ku-ring-gai College, where we had an independent panel who was going to make decisions of whether we were going to get 10 stories or not. There were 3 hours of people standing in that meeting, begging, making speeches, opposing the overdevelopment, wanting to keep Bradfield beautiful, wanting to protect its heritage. And then the planning panel made its decision. 5 minutes it took. And the rezonings went ahead, and the rezonings will continue going ahead until we clean up political donations. Send me to Canberra, help me change the climate in Canberra.
Okay, United Australia, Rob.
Thank you. Yes? You can't hear me? You can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
I can, but I'm not.
Okay. We do need a federal ICAC. We also need a criminal tribunal to bring some of these politicians to answer for the decisions that they've made. The decisions that they've made over the last few years, forcing people to sack employees, forcing people to take medications that they only taking only to save their job, and the bullying in government is at the top level down. Like we've just seen Scott Morrison bully the Liberal Party, sack 17 endorsed candidates because he's such a weak leader. He needs these people to be, people that will support him. I was thinking of another word, I can't say it. He's so weak that he's making sure he's got the people that he can trust to vote for him, and we've got one of those in Bradfield. Bradfield would be a much better electorate if it changed government, because the government only spends money in the electorates that are marginal. They don't bother with the electorates that are safe seats, because the candidate's never here. He's around all over Australia watching shows and enjoying life, helping other people get elected. So other things, what about the Atagi website that says it's okay to vaccinate someone who's sedated for something else? That's in a document. That's government integrity. Is that government integrity? Is that accountability? Will they tell the patient when they wake up, we vaccinated you while you're under for the appendix operation? Scott Morrison's brother is the head of APRA, who told doctors they have to speak positively of the government's mandates or they will lose their license, they'll lose their business. Hundreds and hundreds of doctors lost their business and have left the industry. Or they are doing exactly what the government wants, and they are telling you exactly what the government wants you to hear. That's not integrity. That's not integrity. So if we want to speak about integrity, it's not just about handling the books, and we know they can't do that because they've racked up $1 trillion worth of debt. They cut the budget to Solomon Islands by $300 million, and then approved a drug for a rare blood disorder, which is a side effect of the vaccine. It's $14.5 billion. $14.5 billion, that's 1,000 Solomon Islands. And they didn't even tell you that. It's on their website though. Go to liberal.gov.org.au and have a look at that and tell them what you think. Thank you.
All right, well, I think that's given you plenty to chew on, and I'm looking forward now to some questions. So can I just lay a few ground rules down so we all understand how these are going to work? The first thing is there are 2 roving mics. If you have a mic being held in front of you, you have the floor to ask your question. If you don't have the floor. So put your hand up. The mics will get through in a minute. The mics will get around to you. Don't touch the mic, please. Let the holder hold the mic for obvious reasons. And you have 15 seconds to ask a question. I don't want any policy speeches from the audience. The third thing is, would you name yourself and where you're from? Just say Chris Russell, Wahroonga. or whatever, wherever it is you're from. That's all. We don't need any details, but we just need to know that you're proud enough to say who you are and where you're from. And the final question is, please keep your questions courteous. You can make them as penetrating as you like, but at no time do I want to hear disrespect to these candidates who I think are doing us a great service by standing in this election. And we certainly greatly appreciate them coming tonight, giving up their time to answer your questions for you. So please give them that respect, and I'm not going to preside over the situation, the opposite of that. So if we can start the two mics, we can start maybe over here. Oh, you got a mic? Where's the other mic gone? Oh, there it is there, right. So if you can start here, the gentleman in the black shirt, your number one cab off the rank. And the second mic can come over to this lady with the purple here. So your name and your suburb.
Left Kingston Smith, North Turramurra. Small issue with big consequences. I'd be very interested in a practical answer. If anyone is trying to get rid of a solar panel or a battery will know that it's almost impossible to. No one will take them. What is going to happen when we have 100 million of these a year? How are we actually going to do it? Has anyone got a policy?
Who's got the first? Who's going to handle that first? Janine, go ahead.
Look, this is an issue, and I take your point about how we are to handle the batteries. I've read Saul Griffith. He acknowledges that. But what we need to do is we need to regulate. We need to have a plan. We need to be able to recycle and reuse these batteries. Well, what happens is this technology is something we need to invest in. We have our scientists. We've got to make it a priority as well. So I don't have a solution for you straight away, but I'm saying to you, I take your question on board and I say this is something we do have to address.
Martin, would you like to just comment on that?
Yeah, look, I largely agree with Janine, I guess. You know, it's an area that does need more work, both in the panels and the batteries. I know there is work going into that to look for solutions. In some ways, it's no different to any other waste that we generate as a society. You know, like there's some that's easy to recycle and reuse, some that's much more difficult. And the more complex our manufacturing, the more difficult things are to recycle. You know, it's an area that does need more work. I mean, and I would still say to you too, there's a point around efficiency as well and minimising. I mean, if you think about an EV, a car, you're still better to have a small EV than a big EV. You know, it's perhaps easier to see, you know, in a petrol or a diesel powered car, you know you're using a lot more fuel in a big car, and you know, you're spending more, you're creating more emissions. It's kind of the same with an EV and a battery powered car. You know, you would need more minerals and resources to build that, and then you've got more to get rid of. So you're still better to pick a small car if you can, and hopefully these technologies will come along. Yeah.
I didn't mention too that these answers are also 2 minutes in maximum on each question, so that we can get through all the questions. So, Matt, yeah.
Hello, Pauline Kingston-Smith, and yes, North Turramurra as well. My question is, unfortunately Mr. Fletcher isn't here tonight, but I wanted to know, I'm a Meals on Wheels volunteer, and I found out at a morning tea just 2 weeks ago that the Liberal government on the 1st of July 1923, they are going to be privatising Meals on Wheels. This is the most vulnerable community. To give you an example, there was a lady today that wasn't in, with 2 newspapers. I made the phone call to make sure that she was okay, and things were sorted. If it goes into Uber Meals or anything else and is privatised, apparently us volunteers are still going to have to be volunteers, but Meals on Wheels apparently have to have their own marketing and everything else. What is going to happen to the vulnerable, and what do you think of this proposal? 1st of July 2023, no more Meals on Wheels, only privatised.
Does anyone know about that? You know about that? So none of you have heard about that?
I heard earlier.
I don't think any of us have heard of it. I've never heard of it. So I accept that it might happen, but I don't think we can answer the question.
I'd like to say something.
Go ahead, Janine.
I'd like to say this issue of privatising is just not with Meals on Wheels, it's with everything. This is the solution, the economic solution. Give it to your mates who will make a bit of money on the side. We need to protect our public social good. And that's what we need to get back in government.
Okay, can I move over to here? Just put your hand up if there's one in the middle here. This gentleman here. Okay, go ahead.
Like you're at Turramurra, I just want to make a statement. I just want you to comment.
We don't, no statements.
Okay.
Just a
Now the question is, how do you feel? Do you feel the Westminster system has been operating over the last 2 years in terms of review and real voices being heard to solve the problems that we faced over the last 2 years?
That's a great question. Go ahead.
Not at all. We've had absolutely no opposition for the last 2 years. The Labor Party has taken their wages on false pretences. They're a party that stands for the worker, yet they haven't said boo to the Liberal Party. The ABC and all the mainstream media as well have not said anything other than the Liberal Party narrative for the last 2 years. Then once the election gets called, they just decided to take sides. So up until the election was called, ABC was all for Scott Morrison. What? And the policies. Oh, but they were championing the policies every day, every time I turn on ABC 24. Am I wrong? And I said I don't watch TV, but I do watch it online. I watch it online occasionally.
Don't listen to it.
Okay, no, there's one down here.
You didn't listen to the ABC.
I'm Bill Thomas.
Sorry, one more comment.
I just want to say something about ministerial responsibility. That is the real problem. Ministers are now given so much power that they're acting like little fiefdoms. And they're acting like fiefdoms of our taxpayers' money and saying, I've got the pot of money, let's give it there. No, we've got to stop that.
Okay, sir.
My name is Bill Thomas and I live in Turramurra. What's come out of this discussion tonight is showing a sort of a spectrum between private rights on one side and communal rights on the other. Where do you think Australian society is at the moment on that spectrum of private or communal?
Good question. Who'd like to comment on that first?
Well, my view is the ABC brings us together as a nation. It is our public voice that brings us together, everyone.
But the question is, where do we sit on the spectrum?
Well, we're getting very close to losing our democracy. That's the real issue. And that's why we need to read and strengthen it.
Rob, do you have a view?
I agree there, and we're seeing a form of apartheid in Australia, and it's worse. You know, if you're unvaccinated, they just want to ignore you. They talk like the policies and everything, they talk like you don't exist, you know. Whereas in apartheid, there is a section for black people, or there was a section for black people, a section for white people. There's no section for unvaccinated people. So, and we've also got financial apartheid in Australia too. If you do not own a home in Australia, you're going to be paying 18-20% more interest on your loans. If you own a house, you can get credit at 2 to 3%. So we have financial apartheid as well as COVID apartheid in Australia.
Okay, so there's a question of, sorry, did you want to comment? Go ahead, Mark, sorry.
So look, I'm not sure, it's not quite answering the question, but I guess if you look around the room tonight, we seem to be more divided, don't we, in our opinions, you know, and perhaps more extreme. And I think we need to all work together, you know, and politicians need to work together for the good of the country as a whole, and really, you know, not oppose a policy because the other side came up with it. You know, they've really got to look at what is the best solution for the country.
Sir.
Lindsay Somerville from Linfield. I'd like to ask Rob Fletcher, did Clive Palmer choose you because your name's Fletcher so there'd be two Fletchers on the ballot paper? and what happened to all the hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin that Clive made such a fuss about when he imported it?
The government destroyed more than half of it and has locked up the other half somewhere. He donated that to the government, and then they decided somewhere around the world that it wasn't cool because Donald Trump said it off his lips, so we'll say it's no good. But it is treating people in India. The Delta strain went away in India thanks to hydrochloroquine and ivermectin. But the media didn't talk about that because it didn't fit the narrative in Australia. So You probably didn't see that. You probably didn't see that on the mainstream media.
One more in the middle there, and up the front here.
My first question is
Oh, the first question, Fletcher, yeah, he called me up and he said, yeah, I love your name. No, look, mate, I'm Australian. I grew up in the country. My relatives go all the way back to convicts on both sides. It's an absolute fluke. Paul Fletcher grew up in England, and I'm just had a gut full of this government. You can probably hear it in my voice. And I want to make a change. And if people are confused and vote for me, thank God for that.
No, just hang on. We've got one more and then you. Yeah.
Hornsby. I'll start off with Kevin Rudd stood on the edge of the Murrumbidgee River and said it would never run again in his lifetime. Tim Flannery then told us that Warradamba Dam would never fill again, and if it rained, it would not fall over the dam. In 2005, Tim also told us that we would have a high tide in Sydney around this time now, between 1 to 5 metres higher.
So your question is what?
One more fact. We're told there's 16 billion tonne of ice falls into the ocean of Antarctica every year, but we're not told there's 16 to 18 billion tonne of snow falls on the island. When do we actually get to question the science?
I've got a science background. Science has never settled. You know, if someone says science is settled, that's a dogma. That's a religion, because you're all the time testing things and you're getting new data and you're funding people with different views. The government only pay people who say what they want to hear, and we're going to stop that.
Mark, can I ask you for your comment?
Oh, well, it's a big question. I'm sure Tim Flannery never said the rivers would never flow again. Nobody's ever said that. All right, let me answer the question. All right, you know, we never said that we'd never have another cold day. All right, but if you look at the temperature trends, they are correlated extremely well with our carbon dioxide emissions. There's no doubt that we're contributing. Thank you. So what we've got in terms of what you're observing with weather and climate, all right, there is a long-term trend to increasing temperature, okay? There will be impacts from that. Overlaid with that, you've got some of the El Nino, La Nina effects which last for a couple of years, which are now bringing us the heavy rainfall on the East Coast. They are, by the way, providing hot, extreme temperatures in Western Australia over the past summer and low rainfall, which you may or may not have heard about. And that'll change again in a couple of years, and we'll be back to the extreme hot, dry weather, okay? But the trend is upwards. The loss of ice, you're saying, it's increasing. It's not increasing, it is decreasing. Look at, excuse me, look at, I've got 2 minutes, yeah?
So between you, you've got 2 minutes, and I want to get
Well, look just quickly. Look at what's happening North Pole, South Pole. The amount of the ice cover in the North Pole is drastically falling. Every time we're getting to an ice-free North Pole, okay, over summer, all right, which never happened in our system.
Look it up.
Okay.
Janine,
Janine, you haven't had a word on this yet, so what you've got a
My
comment?
sister-in-law lives at Lismore. The floods that just came went right up to the rafters on a 2-storey building. It was at 3 a.m. that boats had to come in and rescue the people in that house. The extreme events are happening faster and quicker. We are in a very vulnerable time, and I'm a teacher, and my duty of care is for the children and grandchildren. We have to do something on climate change because our future depends on it.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Helen Corby from Turramurra. Mr. Russell said at the very beginning that he would be walking to Wollongong if one of the major parties didn't take Parliament after this election. On the basis that he doesn't have to wear his thongs to Wollongong, I'd like to ask each of our 3 candidates if they were holding the balance of power, behind which team would they cast their vote?
correct my quote. What I said is that if Paul Fletcher doesn't win Bradfield, I'll probably walk to here to Wollongong. So I apologise if I misled you. I wasn't trying to be biased about that at all. Please go ahead.
I'd like to say very clearly and very honestly to you that I have told you that my 3 key issues are action on climate, having an integrity commission, and defending the ABC. So they're my 3 issues, and they're my 3 demands that I will put on the table for both political parties, and they have a time limit to come up with a solution, and I will make my decision based on that.
Good.
So the question's really around preferencing, I guess, isn't it? And
Well, I think the question is, if your party is given...
If a Rob Oakeshott moment was to happen,
what
would you do?
But I think the question is, if you had one issue and they said, we'll give you that issue if you give us your vote, what would that issue be?
Oh, okay, so in my introduction that I talked about the 4 key policies that Adam Band outlined, and that's what he said. He took to the press club and said, you know, these would be the things that he'd be looking to get from the government. So, you know, the action on climate, the dental and mental health into Medicare. I forget the other 2 now. Oh, sorry, that's 3.
Okay, Rob, what about the UAP?
Well, the members of the UAP are predominantly ex-Liberal Party members, and the Liberal Party left us. We didn't leave the Liberal Party. If you look at what the Liberal Party stand for, they've broken just about everything. You know, they free speech, free enterprise, and you know, it's on their website anyway. But what I want to say is, I don't think the Labor Party would want to deal with us. You know, but also I don't think the Liberal Party will either, because we'll want to send half of them to jail. So depends who's got the guts to deal with the UAP. But we will stand firm on many of these policies, particularly restoring the freedom to our country, the freedom of choice to individual health, restoring the doctor-patient relationship. These are non-negotiables. But also, I think any party that has us would race to have the policy to have the I&R licence fee to pay off the debt without taxing you $100,000 each. $100,000 each. You know, because I&R, we have almost a monopoly on it, because 80% of I&R comes from Australia, and it's the best quality. They can't go anywhere else. You know, they've spent about $40 billion building an industry around the Australian I&R. So yeah, there'll be no pushback at all.
And I think it's worth remembering we talk about 2 houses here, the Senate as well, and the Senate is going to have, you know, there's a House of Review, so it's that same question arises in the Senate.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got a question over here.
Yeah, sorry, it's Kim Pentecost from Pimple here. To any of you guys, do you find it an acceptable duty of care that by the Australian Government Health Stats, 4,749 COVID deaths have occurred in 4 months of 2022 have occurred, when Australia has a mRNA jab rate of 90%? And therefore, will you support a call for a Royal Commission into COVID handling, dealing and intervention?
So just again, mic on. Yep, wait, go.
I'd go further than a Royal Commission. I think everyone goes straight to the Royal Commission, but what about a criminal court? You know, as I said before, what Barack Obama said, you know, we've gone through a clinical trial, they haven't issued the results yet. You go to the what's that website where they report yeah, you go to their website, and to try and print a report off that is nearly impossible. They cut off the deaths column when you try to print it, and you can't print a full report. It's incredible, but there are quite a lot of deaths that are close to exceeding the COVID deaths from the vaccine. And in Europe and the US, it's much worse.
Okay. Oh, sorry, go ahead, mate.
I don't know. I dispute what you're saying. You know, I think that's incorrect. But what I would support is an inquiry into our response to COVID. You know, whether we did that well or not. whether we could do it better, what we could do better. You know, did we spend our money wisely or not?
And I would reiterate and I would support that we do need to have a look at our response, and because we will have further pandemics happening, and we need to learn what our mistakes have been and how we can avoid them for the next one.
Okay. All right, next question.
Thank you. Just very briefly, given there's been so much statements, I think you saying that you're a scientist, doesn't give you license, and it was a very long time ago. So I just thought I'd put that out there to all the scientists that I don't think you should be using that as authority. But the question is, for all of you, can I just ask you, do you live in the electorate? Yes. So do you, Rob, live in the electorate?
I moved to Clara in 2005. I lived there for 15 years, and I moved to St Ives last year.
So you live in St Ives?
Yeah.
Okay, and?
I live in Gordon. I went to Gordon East Public School, and I went to Clara High School, and I think there's 2 Clara High School students here with me.
Yeah, and I live in Linfield, yeah, as I said, last 14 years.
Okay, next question in the red shirt. And for you, no, we handle one question. I think we just have one question at the start anyway. Can you just put your hand up so I can see who you want to ask a question? Yes, your name.
Hi, my name's Dennis.
Right up in the back corner for you, on the bar table.
Dennis Ackermans from Wahroonga. My question to the 3 candidates is, will they support a proper scientific debate into the future potential for nuclear power? And if not, why not?
Thank you.
My view is there has been quite a lot of reports into nuclear power. They are not economically viable for this small nation, and solar now is cheaper. It is not economically viable for this nation to go down the nuclear trip.
Will they support a debate?
Janine mentioned inquiries. I understand South Australia had a good look at that because they do have some uranium mining there, and whether they should have a nuclear industry, and the conclusion was no, there wasn't really an opportunity. There might be an opportunity for a nuclear waste dump, but that was about it. But since you're talking about nuclear, it is more expensive than the alternatives that we've got here. Okay. So the UK has decided they're going to build a nuclear reactor. The government is guaranteeing a price of power that is about twice, what is in our current electricity system, the national electricity market. The cost of that build is like 4 or 5 times the cost of new wind, even offshore wind. So it just doesn't stack up. Nuclear, it's the same as coal, okay? Our coal has been forced out of the system because it's inflexible, it likes to run steady. But it always had to drop down overnight, so it didn't make much money overnight. Now with solar panels, it has to drop down during the day as well, so it's not making much money during the day. So the coal power stations are old, they're getting towards retirement age anyway, they're becoming unreliable, they're inflexible. Nuclear is the same, it's inflexible, it likes to run steady the whole time. It's expensive, it's going to be uncompetitive in the system.
Well, if we were allowed to build new coal power stations, we could upgrade the old ones that are unreliable and wasteful, maybe. It's like a car, you could have a 40-year-old car, or you could have a brand new one with airbags and all the bells and whistles. Solar power may be cheap, but the Chinese use a lot of the Uyghurs in the north of China to build the solar panels. And we do need scientists to sit down and talk about a lot of things, not just nuclear energy, but the scientists have shut down. They can't speak their voices. There's so many professions out there that can't speak their mind for fear of losing their career, fear of being vilified by a rabid media, including the ABC.
Right, next question is right up at the table at the back.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Matt Devlin. I live in Turramurra. First, I'd like to thank the Turramurra Bowling Club for putting on this evening. It's no cost to me. My question, I suppose, there's been a lot of discussion tonight about about community funding and grants and the susceptibility of those to bribery, corruption, and the conversation that evolved around the federal ICAC or independent commission thereof. So I suppose my question is in two parts to all the candidates who are with us tonight, and I appreciate the three of you out of all those who are running for the seat who are sharing time with us. But the first part is, what are your views on the importance of community funding and grants for organisations, bowling clubs, local sporting associations and other community efforts? And what impact do you see, or what requirements and changes to guidelines do you see as being required to ensure that the very vital funding to organisations and community organisations such as the club are able to continue if your hopes for an integrity commission was to get up?
Thank you. Who'd like to do that first?
I'd just like to explain that there are legislation for the federal government. For example, they're now going into the grants business, but that wasn't their constitutional power. And secondly, what you need is a national audit body that looks at these grants so that they are not allocated to marginal seats. And they are assessed on merit. And they are seen as equitable. That's what we want. We want good government and we want good decisions. And grants are a part of that, but it has to be done properly.
Anyone else want to comment about that?
Yeah, well, I guess I'd just say, look, I agree with Janine. I mean, a lot of people here have probably applied for funding in some form as part of some organisation. You know, so how frustrating is it to learn that, you know, you're not allocated funding on the basis of need or merit or anything like that, but you missed out because somebody else was in a marginal seat. You know, so we really need, a clear, open, and accountable processes for allocating funds. And you know, if I could have a dig at our local member, you know, so he didn't think that we should know about, the funding of car parks. He thought that should be kept secret for 20 or 30 years. You know, so that's just not the sort of thing. And maybe we have to take some of that out of the hands of out of government ministers and have it in the public service and allow that process to happen.
There's still a process of pork barrelling in this country that they use to shore up their mates' clubs or golf clubs or however. But I know an example. Recently I was speaking to an editor of the TWT paper, independent paper in Lane Cove area, and there was $50 million that should have been allocated to independent news media in Sydney and surrounds, and only 10 million of it was given to Austereo, and 40 million was never distributed to the other parties, and that was Paul Fletcher's watch for doing that. So goodness knows why they do that. Like they should be held to account. That's my point.
Okay.
Margaret Long from East Lindfield. It concerns me that on your watch you've allowed China to buy our shores and our ports. Does that concern you, especially the Greens?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So, but I wouldn't say just China. I mean, so the Greens, don't really believe in privatisation of government assets. You know, so we believe that they should be held, and I guess something as strategic like a port shouldn't really be sold to anyone. You know, whether it's a commercial interest or an overseas interest. Government. Well, I don't know. What can be done? Can we tear up a contract? You know, it's a cut. Why are you asking? Why are you asking just me? I don't know. So we haven't been in a position of power to address that particular. I'm not sure about that. I doubt that somehow actually, because as I say, we're not in favour of privatisations generally, and we've fought against privatisation of electricity assets, for example. But I don't know. You know, it has been in the news. Have either of the major parties acted on it? Have they made it a priority? I don't know. Do they see that they can? I don't know, tear up the contract.
Okay, look, can we, I think this is an important point. Could I get to Rob's view from the UAP's point of view?
Well, like every case should, I think every portfolio should be looked at, what they've done to this country over the last decade or more. I wouldn't doubt that they've sold a lot of it down the river, like ports like Darwin, allowing foreign ownership for residential property has literally just pushed the price up and made it unaffordable for our kids. All these things, they really need to be looked at, foreign ownership in so many ways in Australia.
Okay, so we've got a repeat question, another question, follow-up question, I assume, right here.
Yeah, it's me again.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to let everyone have one go first. That's the reason I held you back.
Okay, it's I met an engineer in Adelaide who makes and can retrofit onto existing coal-fired power stations a system which pulverises coal, puts static electricity through it, then puts it into water and it injects it into the furnace like diesel. It has near on double the BTU output. The waste product or the carbon coming off is negligible. He cannot sell one unit in Australia. He has sold many into Russia, many into China. The Australian government has just hog-tied him every inch of the way. What the hell is going on?
Okay, who would like to comment on that?
Well, it sounds quite unlikely to me. I mean, to add water to coal, it means to add water to coal, you'd be wasting energy to heat up the water and boil it off. Okay, it just doesn't make sense. The coal-fired power stations in New South Wales, Victoria are privately owned. If they thought it was such a good idea, maybe they'd be interested in putting it into their technology. The brown coal that's burned in Victoria in the power stations there is much higher than the black coal. The moisture in that is higher than the black coal in New South Wales, and it's lower quality. The efficiency of those stations is lower than the ones in New South Wales. So, adding water, the coal that goes into power stations is already pulverised. There's already add oil to it in some cases. So that's not new, but adding water is not going to help.
Can we have some non-UAP members questions here, please?
I'll go through the questions. Yeah, I'm doing the questions as people put their hands up. So that's all I can do. So, ma'am, you're the lady in front of you, I think, was first. Or one of you. Okay.
Sorry, that's right. Sorry. Considering that Australia has a deforestation rate of the size of the MCG every 86 seconds, so what pulls carbon out of the air? Plants, right? We also have one of the greatest mines in permaculture who actually lives in Lismore. His entire acreage, and it's hundreds of acres of farm, did not get flooded because he knew how to build all the properties and all the special things that they do. Why are we not using mines like that? Because we don't really need to, we do have to do extra things, but if we plant out our country, we won't have this issue.
Yeah. Was that a question?
Why aren't we doing that?
Forestry is a really serious issue. We are a very big deforestator and we need stronger forestry laws. We need stronger federal environment laws, which have been so significantly weakened, which means our koalas, our leadbeater possums, our platypuses are all on extinction road. And that is the federal government's responsibility. Regenerative agriculture is really important and we should be supporting it.
You want to comment on that one?
I agree with Janine, and I guess the question, as you put it in the statements, and it's also, so forestry is also important for removing carbon from the atmosphere, so it's important that we protect what we've got and increase that, yeah.
Okay, was there a question in front there? Yes.
Oh yes. Sorry.
No. Yeah, whichever one didn't do the question before, yes.
Mary Papathiaharis from South Turramurra. We focused a lot on energy and that, but I want to see something done about the future. So I had to go through 2 university degrees and work 3 jobs to pay my HECS debt. So I'd like to know what is anyone that's going to get in this electorate going to do for the future students and the future generations? What are we going to do about getting them forward? Because I struggle to pay my HECS debts. How are they going to manage to pay their HECS debt?
So I mentioned, yeah, it's one of the Greens' core policies that we're taking to this election. So the free higher education and forgiveness of HECS debt, and for the reasons that I outlined. That you know, when you're just finishing a higher education, you know, you might want to start a family, you might want to buy a house. You've already got you know, quite a huge debt. You know, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. So yeah, so that's our policy. And well, I've got a mate who's you know, he's a couple of years older than me. He is just now approaching a point where he's almost paid off his student debt. Okay, and he's got no house, and you know, so you know, like a lot of Australians, housing ownership is falling. So we really need to address that. Yeah.
Anyone else want to comment?
Can I just add to my question?
Okay.
Sorry. Because my concern is that people that can afford to buy a degree in this country are buying a degree. What about people that have got the intelligence and the capability, but they can't actually get there because they don't have the finances? That was the reason for it.
I think it's the same answer. I think, you know, it's one of the ways that you get an opportunity to get ahead. Yeah.
Can I just say as moderator, I'm not going to comment on any of these except to say that I deal with the young graduating students continuously. I just hung the Chris Russell Medal around the neck of the top ag graduating student in New South Wales at the Royal Show last week. The quality of those people and the quality of the research they're doing at undergraduate level gives me an amazing confidence for where we're going in the future with our young graduates. So I think we can be very proud of the young quality that we're getting through, not denying the problems you're talking about, but in terms of the quality, it's certainly not robbing that. I'm so impressed with who I meet every time. You go ahead.
But may I just finish with that saying, as a teacher and an educator, it is appalling what we have done to our education system. We have turned it into a business. Education is not a business. Education is a human right, and we have to look at all stages of education, from preschool to schools. Our schools are missing out. I've gone to over 16 public schools in the Bradfield electorate, and I know that parents are really concerned about their children and they want the best for them. University and TAFEs have been savage, so we need to restore quality education.
And that's why the UAP.
Okay, can we have a microphone?
Can I finish that?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's why the UAP is spending $20 billion on education as one of their platforms, and also forgiving the HECS debt. Because the problem with debt is it distorts price discovery. What's the value of a course? If you have a maximum debt of, say, $50,000, all of a sudden all the courses will become $50,000 because the kids will just sign up for a debt at that price. You take HECS away, then the universities will have to start offering them at a reasonable price.
Okay. Right, so we've got a microphone. You've got one at the back there? Yes, do the one there at the back, and the other microphone just with the lady with the purple top. Sorry, I don't know your name.
All right. Yeah, Mark Ferris from Wahroonga. First of all, thanks very much to everyone for running. We live in the most safe Liberal seat in the country, so good on you all for running. So my question is about planning. So when most of us start a family, one of the things we think about is how many kids we can support, what size is appropriate for the resources that we can provide them. However, most of the major parties and even the smaller ones don't really address this issue at all. So my question to the candidates is, how big do you think Australia should be, considering it has a finite space and finite resources, and at what kind of trajectory do you think we should get to that place?
So I think the question is how big, you're talking about population-wise, correct? Yeah, so this is the Dick Smith sort of question.
Yeah, to Dick Smith, and one of the real issues that I have there is about really grappling with this issue of sustainable population. We really have to think about it, because basically it is an issue, a global overpopulation problem. Everyone wants to come to Australia, of course. But we have really these really challenging questions about population, and And we shouldn't be using population for the economic growth. We should be trying to stop that nexus. We should be really trying to look after what we have and having a sustainable population increase.
Sir?
Look, to be honest, I don't think the Greens have a position on it, on population, which is, perhaps surprising. Like to me, because I do look at the environmental impact of it. But no, they've stayed away from, saying we should have a particular population.
The UAP don't have a policy on population forecasts, but forecasters have forecast the Western nations to fall dramatically in population over the next 3 to 4 years. Maybe they know something that we don't. But so many leaders around the world are talking about reducing the population, and are quite excited by that. I don't see why they would be excited by it. Who's going to volunteer?
Can I ask a supplementary question from the chair?
Yeah.
So many governments seem to say that our reliance for our continuous desire for economic growth comes from immigration.
Yeah.
Is that a valid policy from the UAPs and the Greens and from your point of view?
To quote Joe Hockey, he went to, when he was Treasurer, he went to New York and said, they asked him, how can property continue to rise so dramatically in Australia, unlike any other country? And he said, it's quite simple. We have 2.5% immigration every year, so we have to build houses. And Australia has had a policy of propping up the property prices with an outsized immigration policy. Now, it'll be very interesting to see what's going to happen in the future now that that's been clipped.
So what would your immigration policy be, or your party?
I haven't discussed it with anyone. I think we need to get Australians fully employed before we start bringing in people. We've sacked nurses and teachers and doctors. They should go back to work before we start bringing in Brazilians or people from that part of the world just to cover the jobs that they say aren't there, because I don't think the unemployment rate's 4%. It's probably more like 6 or 7 or 5.4. I think Albanese said that.
So Martin, what would the Greens policy be on immigration?
As I said, so a total number, we don't have a policy on that. The Greens actually say that we should accept more refugees, being a wealthy country, that we should have a higher, allowing a higher number of refugees, and we recognise the contribution of those people. I actually, look, I have to, given with the proviso or the, exclusion that somebody mentioned about, just 1 hour means that you're employed 1 hour of work a week, but I do believe the unemployment rate is low at the moment, and it is difficult for people to find workers, across the spectrum. So, it really means, I guess, that we've missed out on immigration for a period of time. We normally have a lot of students that are here, working here. This is not necessarily Greens policy, it's just my observation. We'd normally have a lot of overseas students that do a lot of work that Australians don't necessarily want to do, and those people have been missing for a few years. I think the employment conditions are tight, mate, but that's just an observation.
And Janine, do you have a view about immigration?
I don't believe migration should be used as an economic stimulation. That is the cheap way out, and it is not in the long-term interest. I think most Australians do not want a big Australia, and we really have to look at our resources such as water. Do we have the water? Do we have the infrastructure? We are really a big country, but actually we have a very narrow strip of livable land, and basically we know in our lifetime that so much bushland is being destroyed and do it. But we also need to have integrity, and because again, the Business Council is really running this country and telling us what we should be doing instead of having, real experts in this area to decide.
Just add one other thing I was thinking. I think one of the things that we do wrong is that we import educated people into Australia rather than educating our own people and bringing them up to
Okay, well, it's time for one more question because we're just over time of what we agreed with the club, so please.
Hello, it's Pauline Smith again, being a hog. What does the panel believe on, with the drawdown that was allowed during COVID from the superannuation, the extra drawdowns that were taken out, where they might have been just seemed to be small amounts, 10, 20,000 that were allowed to take out, to allow people to live when they were not actually putting into their super. At a young age, this will actually have a cumulative effect, a huge cumulative effect on their super. What does each individual one on the panel intend to do that to make sure they have enough super when they get to the age to retire?
This is an issue that really affects women. This is where women are so disadvantaged by the lack of superannuation, and that is going to be highlighted with this removal of it. So I think we need to really, that shouldn't have happened. I think we should have not allowed that to happen because, as you say, even small amounts have huge impacts for women when they retire in later life.
So yes, I think there was definitely a problem because the people that were withdrawing from their super were really the people that had very low super balances and insecure work. So really what that says to me, and well, as you point out, they're starting from a lower base. It's going to affect them when they get to retirement age. So say again, sorry.
You would oppose it.
I oppose
super out for any other reason.
I would personally. I think I'm not sure what the Greens' policy is on that. But yeah, I see the super as being there for retirement. You build it for retirement. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So really, before I get on to that, what it points to really was that during COVID, government gave inadequate support to those people. Like so, people in casual work, a lot of them couldn't access the JobKeeper payments, where people that were in permanent work could. And so, these people that are already poorly off, have this additional burden of then drawing down their super. What's the solution? I think part of the solution, at least, is to try and address the casualisation in the workforce. And the federal government can do that in its own. The people that it employs directly and set a standard there. So once you're in a permanent job and you do get those benefits of permanent work, like superannuation, like sick leave, and like annual leave, you can start building up that balance again.
And Rob, could you comment on that?
Thank you. I've worked in the finance and investment industry for 20 years. A lot of people put forward, young people can get money out of their super to buy their first home, but most people under 30 don't have more than 50,000 in super anyway, because of casualisation, going to uni, and starting permanent jobs much later than what we may have done when we were younger. So it's not a magic bullet by any means. Even if it is a policy, it's not going to, get you a house in Turramurra. I'd be open to all aspects because, to be honest, someone needs a house to live for the next 40 years rather than, there are other strategies and investment strategies that could make up that time. I think a lot of people who took the 10,000 out played Bitcoin during the COVID lockdown. And I'm not advocating that, but I know a lot of people did. So, hopefully they did something wisely with their 10,000 if people took it out. So.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, I think that brings us to the end. And can I just say, as moderator, thank you so much for your in-depth questions. Thank you for your courtesy, and can I particularly thank you for your discipline in working through the evening and making this, I hope, a valuable evening to you in listening to the view of these parties. I'd also like to thank our three candidates. As numerous people have pointed out, they didn't have to be here, they didn't have to stand. In fact, it's really just they're giving up their time with no likelihood of success. And yet they're doing that. They will definitely have success in influence, but they won't have any likelihood of being in the government, most probably. But their influence, I think, is significant, and we wish them well. So thank you very much for coming along.
Thanks everybody, and I just want to echo what Chris has said. how good was this to be able to actually hear different views and debate and talk about it. Well done to you guys. For me, it sort of restores what we feel like has been eroded away for a while. So well done. We're not all going to agree, are we? But I also want to say thanks to Chris, part of the reason why he's managed this well, and just a small token of thank you very much. Hope you enjoy that. My understanding is that are you three willing just to stay back for a little bit, or so if you have some questions, you want to just have a chat to them, they're open for that. They're tired, they've been going for a couple of hours, and keep the respect going, and thanks everybody. Cheers.